Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode from Your Own Pathway Leadership and Mental Well-Being in the Workplace. I hope you all had a wonderful Memorial weekend. And I'm recording this actually on Memorial Day. So I hope you all had a fun weekend, did whatever you want, got to rest, do whatever it is that your hearts desire. For those who don't know me, my name is Paia. I'm a trained psychotherapist turned empowerment life coach and organizational leadership consultant, where I bring my experience to empower all of you to forge your path and to own it. So, this week, this episode, I realized that there's a lot of things that we're not ready to talk about when it comes to the workplace. And this is the reason why I decided to do these episodes, because I realize as an EAP therapist, for those who don't know what EAP means, it's Employee Assistance Program Mental Health. And so as an EAP therapist, I worked with so many clients who worked in Fortune 500 companies here in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and there were so many things that they brought up, regardless of what organization that they worked with for. There were so many common themes, and this is why I am doing the work that I'm doing, and why I decided to create this series, because there's so much trauma, there's so much bullying, there's so much wounds that need to be healed from the workplace. And even though it is 2025, there are record numbers of layoffs. We're talking more about mental health. I feel like nothing really is actually being done about this. And it's all talk, but there's no walk. And today's episode is discussing why. Why are we afraid to talk about organizational trauma in the workplace? A lot of this still gets swept under the rug. There's not acknowledgement about it. And there's still dismissive about these issues. And companies make it a you problem, not an organizational problem. So today's episode is really focusing on that, and why are companies and organizations still afraid, or why are we afraid to even talk or discuss organizational trauma? And so I think when we hear the word trauma, we think of trauma, like we think of the war veteran or the child that has been physically, emotionally abused. And so when we think of trauma, we think of the extreme. When we think of work, we don't think of work as extreme, or what we deal with at work as extreme. Especially here in America, it's part of the culture, it's part of the process. It's like, let's work. What are you crying about? What are you bitching about? If you can't do this, then get a different job. And so there's a misunderstanding about what organizational trauma is. And we're afraid to talk about organizational trauma because it disrupts the illusion that workplaces are just professional environments, when in reality, they're human systems. They're human systems like family systems, church systems, whatever system it is, where harm, power imbalances, and psychological injury often go unaddressed. It's noticeable, but it goes unaddressed. The effects of workplace trauma can be devastating when we don't address or acknowledge it. This can happen both psychologically, physically, emotionally. We don't often say this word, but also spiritually too. And when this happens, chronic stress, chronic diseases can appear and can lead to anxiety, depression, and again, other physical illnesses like cardiovascular disease or stomach pain. Or I remember this one time I hated my job and I started having stabbing pain in my stomach. And I went and checked it out. They're like, nothing's wrong with you. That's when I knew, I'm like, you know what? I gotta quit this job, because having constant stomach pain was just not worth it for me. Studies have shown that workplace trauma can have an impact on, a person's individual life, and a person's personal life, of course a professional life, and oftentimes, regardless of the personal or the professional life, it leads to strained relationships both personally and professionally. So, for instance, a study found that employees who experience workplace bullying were more than likely to develop post traumatic stress disorder, which is PTSD. Now, I know that when we think of PTSD, we have limited views of what post traumatic stress disorder is. Again, we often think about the war veteran, we often think about the child who was physically abused, or a car accident, or being in a natural disaster. We don't ever think of someone developing post traumatic stress disorder in the office or at the workplace, because we, again, have a very limited view of what trauma is. And furthermore, the financial costs of workplace trauma is staggering. It's staggering, with estimates suggesting that it costs business billions, that's right, I said billions, not millions, of dollars in lost productivity and healthcare costs. I mean, does this surprise any of you? Does this surprise any of you? I mean, how many of us have had to take a day off? How many of us have quit our jobs because our mental health was so impacted by our workplace, by the trauma, the bullying, how we felt, how we were overworked? I'm not surprised that companies are spending billions on this, and still we are still not talking about this. And so, what are some of the impacts that we see? Or you're thinking, well, what are scenarios, or what are situations that can cause trauma in the workplace? Here's just some examples, and some of you may have gone through them, some of you may not. I have gone through some of this, and let me tell you, it is hard. It is hard to wake up every day to go to work when you have been in situations like this where there's toxic leadership. It is 2025. There is not a day that goes by where there's an article about toxic leadership. Chronic burnout. We're seeing more and more chronic burnout. We are finally acknowledging the chronic burnout. We see this, the public shaming or scapegoating. I worked at places where somebody had to take the blame, and they blamed someone who was not to blame, but they were the easiest person to blame. Microaggressions and systematic inequalities. In 2025, we are seeing a lot of this, especially with DEI being kind of like the enemy of 2025. This one does not surprise any of us. Layoffs without care, layoffs where you don't have access the next day when you go to work and you're wondering what the fuck happened. Layoffs, layoffs without care. We are seeing more of this. This is why millennials and Gen Zs are saying fuck loyalty, and I agree. Fuck loyalty. Um, gaslighting in feedback or performance. I have received that too in my 17 years or 15 years of being employed. Retaliation for speaking up, and especially the unsafe power dynamics at work. And it's not just what happens, it's how the organization responded, or more likely how they didn't respond, that increases the organizational trauma. And so here are some reasons on why we're afraid to talk about organizational trauma. Why does it still get swept under the rug? Why is it a touchy topic? Why don't we talk about this and acknowledge it? And the only way that we can change this is to talk about it. And yet we're still not talking about it. So what are reasons why we're afraid to talk about it? So here's number one. Number one is that it threatens these power structures. What this means is that admitting harm often means that leadership is a failure, bias, or there's mismanagement. And many organizations would rather protect their image than their people. They rather protect their image than their people. And silence protects systems by not healing. I, I think all of us who have worked are not surprised by this, are not surprised that it threatens power structures, and we would rather hide than admit than try to fix. And it's all about the image, because when we do that, it's like, oh, we don't have any trust. I think I see this especially in the Catholic Church, where there are all of those what happened with the Catholic Church. So instead of admitting, they were protecting. It was about their image rather than and silencing rather than doing something about it. So that's number one, is it threatens power structures. Number two is we're so conditioned to normalize it. We're conditioned to normalize it. We're taught that paying your dues, which, by the way, I'm going to do another episode about, is paying your dues, being overworked, and staying quiet is part of being a team player. And I hear this all the time, professionally, personally, is that trauma gets rebranded as resilience. Trauma gets rebranded as resilience. It's like, oh, but this is going to teach you resilience. This is going to teach you to take shit. Okay. Yes, it does. And at the same time, though, why did I have to? Why did I have to learn to take shit in the workplace? What does this actually do for me? And so it gets rebranded as resilience, and we're so conditioned and normalized to accept abuse. Toughening up is not something that we need to pass down or pass to future generations or current generations. We have to end that cycle. Number three, HR often serves the company, not the people. Many employees fear backlash or retaliation. And do you blame them? Do you blame people? Because there's little trust in systems that are meant to protect the company and not the people. And I have my own stories about HR too, which actually helped. HR actually helped in facilitating me getting fired, or for putting me in positions where I was powerless. And I always knew HR was like that, but when I was in a position where they reminded me that I was powerless, I knew that I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to trust HR. And I know that there's some people who are HR watching this. This is nothing against you. I know you're doing your job. And also, who's ever watching this, protect yourself. Protect yourself. Always have your own and documentation. If HR wants you to do something, have backup, protect yourself. Always protect yourself, because they are there to protect the company, not the people. So number three is HR often serves the company, not the people. Number four, there's no language or space for discussing trauma. Again, the word trauma sounds too emotional, too intense, too personal. Like, that's not something we go through. We don't do trauma. That's other people. Again, that's the abused women, or the abused child, or that's the veteran who is at war. That's them. That's not us. Trauma doesn't belong to us. Trauma, we're at work. Yeah, it's shitty. Yeah, I get yelled at, but that's just a part of the process. Yeah, I get bullied. Yeah, I do all of that. That happens to me, but that's part of work. It's supposed to suck. We're supposed to get abused. And so when there's no language or space for it, we accept it. We've been told that work is what we're supposed to be: logical, neutral, and composed. And you're supposed to hate your job. I think this is not anything against boomers, but I think boomers are good at telling, their millennial and Gen Z kids, it's a job. You're supposed to hate it. That's why you get paid. You don't have to hate your job. You don't have to hate your job. You have the right to feel safe. You have the right to feel safe at your job. Also, your nervous system. Our body tells us so much about when things are wrong. Listen to your body. Don't leave your your nervous system at the door, especially when you badge in. Now, I know that a lot of people are being laid off. Having a job right now is seen as a luxury. And when you have a job and you hate it, some people might say, well, boohoo, at least you have a job. It's a job. It's a job, and if that job is causing you psychological, emotional, spiritual, whatever harm or whatever it is that you're feeling, listen to your body. Listen to your body, trust it. Your body is telling you what you may not be ready to admit. So there's number 4. There's no space or language for it. Number 5, it's easier to talk about productivity than pain. A lot of leaders would rather implement a new strategy than unpack the emotional residue of layoffs, turnover, or abuse of power. Getting to the root of it is not their MO. And a lot of times workplaces would rather focus on measure KPIs than the actual emotional costs. And talking to consultants who do this type of work, which I do too, companies will need to invest in building foundations. And that's going to cost more money upfront and save more money in the long run. A lot of companies don't want to invest right now. They would rather keep losing and losing until maybe they finally start seeing a pattern, if they will ever acknowledge it, because fixing causes more money upfront than later. And so it's easier again to talk about productivity than pain. So those are the 5 points that I wanted to make. But so what happens? What happens when we don't talk about organizational trauma, when we don't acknowledge it, when we sweep it under the rug and we just keep saying, you know what? Companies are like saying, no, it's not us. It's the people that we hire. It's them. So what happens? These things are not going to surprise you at all. Of course, there's high turnover. There's quiet quitting. I know I did a lot of quiet quitting, where you just go in, do your job, and you're slowly, you don't go above and beyond anymore, because what's the point? What's the point? Disengagement, loss of innovation, re-traumatization. Yes, there's definitely a loss of trust, and the culture is damaged. So that's what happens when we sweep it on the rug. What needs to change? What are the changes that need to happen for us to talk and to acknowledge and to take accountability? Accountability, that's a word that I think a lot of companies are not ready to do also. What needs to change is that leadership needs to be trained in emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, how many of us have had leaders where we're just like, wow, they don't get it. They don't get it. They don't get it. Also, real consequences for demonstrating harmful behavior, and not just coaching or not just like a HR, PR spin. Oh, we see this a lot too. Oh, this leader needs therapy. They need this. They need that. And it's like, all right. What are you actually doing about this? What is that leader actually doing about it? What is this company actually doing about this to make changes? There's no real consequences. And so the person who is causing the harm knows that they can continue doing it. There needs to be space for reflection, for repair, and for telling the truth. For telling the truth. One of the things that a lot of employees that I worked with, one of the most frustrating parts that they say was the lack of transparency for leadership and for companies. And in order to change, we need to have transparency. And this is not just like performative, or especially I want to say after George Floyd, a lot of companies like, oh yeah, we're doing DEI. This is something that we do not believe in. And then as soon as 2025 with the new presidency, it's like, oh, we don't need DEI anymore. So a lot of it is just performative. And so this is why employees are like, no, we don't trust this company. We don't trust it. We don't trust it, we're not going to be invested in it. Yeah, we're going to show up and do our job, but that's all there is. And lastly, understanding that healing is a strategy, not just a soft skill. Now, I know a lot of companies like, oh, that's a soft skill. That's a hard skill. Oh, we don't need to work on soft skills. It's not a soft skill. It's a necessity. It's a necessity to have as a leader, as an organization, if you want to thrive and keep your employees. So these are the reasons why we're afraid to talk about organizational trauma, and we sweep it under the rug. We don't talk about this because there's still so much lack of understanding of it, and we're still covering up a lot of it. And also, we're not ready to take accountability. When I say we're, I mean companies, I mean places, I mean the people, leadership. We're not ready to take accountability for this change. So that is all that I have for today. And if you are watching this and you've experienced workplace trauma or have thoughts on the topic, please share your thoughts and comments with us. This is something that I'm very passionate with because I have been through this. This is why I talk about this. This is why I talk about this, because I have been through some workplace trauma that changed my life and really empowered me to talk about this, to speak about it, because this is the only way that we are going to make changes. And this is why I do organizational leadership consulting also. So again, I would love to hear from you, your insights, your comments, and also make sure to check out my other videos on mental well-being in the workplace. I couldn't say that word. Check out my other videos on mental well-being in the workplace. And if you're new to my channel, like this episode, please hit the like and subscribe button. But otherwise, I will see you all next time, and take care.